of nets going up along the side of the aircraft. You could either sit in the net or you could lay down and go to sleep. They were called bucket seats. For our meals, we had box lunches, which contained sandwiches which were in the beginning fresh and delicious and had a few other things there. I forget what the garnishments and other things were, but we had little cartons of milk. And toward the end of the trip, they became hard and crusty and dried out because there were no modern facilities for the preservation of food on airplanes. And our flight was long. From Westover Field on the East Coast to Lodges Air Force Base on the island of Terceira in the Azores in the Atlantic off the coast of Portugal and Spain. I don't remember exactly how long it took us, but I remember being on that plane all day and sleeping all night and being on that plane part of another day. Without refueling, without landing. I don't remember what kind of a plane it was, but it was a big plane with multiple engines. And in those years, right after World War II, it could have been one of several, but I'm not even going to take a guess because I don't know. But I can tell you that when we landed in the Azores, there was no base housing available for this family. And so my father rented a mansion miles away in a village called Fonte de Bastard, which literally means the Fountain of the Bastards. I don't know where it got that name. If you look at the island of Terceira, Azores, and you have a map, you will see exactly where that village is. In the center of the village, the largest house in that village my father rented. It had 3 floors, including a basement. Each floor had balconies, and it was surrounded by a huge wrought iron fence. It had whitewashed stone enclosures in the back of the yard for chickens and pigs and any kind of livestock that you wanted to raise. It had a huge raised garden which my mother brought to life like magic. And it was haunted. It really was. And in the basement were huge, gigantic oak barrels full of wine that were aging and had been aging for years and were going to age for years beyond the time that we were there. And we were there for 3 years, and nobody ever came and emptied those barrels of their wine. At that time, I knew nothing of what that meant. Underneath the whole structure was a huge cistern which collected water from the rain, and it was always full of the most wonderful tasting water that you've ever seen in your life. And we learned about another people. We learned about another place. We learned about another culture. We learned how to play with children without speaking their language, and over a period of time, we began to learn their language, and soon we could converse with those children, and they could converse with us. And I was amazed at the contrast between their life and ours. And I want to tell you about that so that you will learn to even, on the most remotest scale, appreciate what you have. And that was given to you by the Founding Fathers in this nation, simply because you were born here and for no other reason. Ladies and gentlemen, the people that we lived with in that village were, I'm sure, according to their standards, very well off. There was a man who owned the general store, which was down the hill from us. We could look down from off the balcony of our living room And we could see Connect's store. His name was Connect. And then the huge Catholic cathedral, and then off in the distance, the ocean. Connect was probably the richest man in town besides my father, and we could never understand that because my father was not rich. My father was a lieutenant in the United States Army Air Corps, or United States Air Force. I'm not sure which it was at that time, and it doesn't matter because I'm recounting my memories, and this is the way I remember it. My father was a lieutenant. In those days, a lieutenant, even with a family, a wife, and 3 children, according to our standards of living, didn't make dip. He was a poor man himself. But in that country, my father on his salary was wealthy beyond his own imagination, was able to rent the only huge mansion in this entire village, was looked up to by the villagers as the patron of the village. When they needed something, they came to my father, which I'm sure irritated Connect to no end, because up until the time my father arrived, he was the man who had the influence and the power. This is the way I remember it. The name could be different, but I remember it as Connect. I don't know why. I met a little boy. His name was Joaquin, which meant Jackie, as I learned in later years. And the way I met him is he lived across the alley from our home, and he would climb up over the wall into our grounds while we were asleep or away, and he would steal our toys. It wasn't long until I realized that our toys were being stolen, little cars and toys and dolls and things that we had, and we didn't have a lot because my father didn't have a lot of money to spend. You see, he was considered to be a rich man by the standards of the village in which we lived, but when it came to purchasing things for the family from the Sears catalog, we had no money. We had no money, and the only time we ever received toys was on Christmas. And it was never a lot of toys. When my father made trips to other countries or back to the United States on airplanes as a pilot, he would bring us back things like classic comic books, Donald Duck comic books, things like that. And one time I was standing on the balcony, I looked across the alley, and I saw on top of a roof this elaborate city and roads, all mapped out with stones and little rock walls and our toys. And so I immediately realized that whoever had built that on top of that roof had been stealing our toys. And I went over there, climbed up on top of that roof, and there was a little boy who understood that he was wrong and that he had stolen our toys. But at the same time, he was full of pride. And we confronted each other on that roof, and we pushed each other around for a few minutes until I realized that what I saw on this roof was the only thing that he had ever had in his entire life that he could call his own, even though he had stolen a good portion of it from us. And I wasn't going to let him get away with that. I picked up every single toy that belonged to us, except for one, and I gave it to him. I took the rest of the toys back home. And every time we got a new toy, I would give him an old toy. And when he get tired of the oldest toy that he had received from us, he would come and give it back. And so we arrived at an understanding that he wasn't a thief, really. Down in his heart, he was never a thief. And I think he had intended never to keep all that he had taken from us, and that he was embarrassed at having been discovered. And so we made a peace and a friendship that lasted the whole time that we lived there. Now, these people, in their ignorance, were very, very happy. If my family had never come to that village, they would never have known that they had lacked anything. That little boy would not ever have known that there were toys such as those that we possessed. And his life would have been much happier. There are things that we do in this world that are good for society, and things that we do that are absolutely terrible for humankind. The worst thing that you could ever do for a remote population of aboriginal humans on some island anywhere in this world, or deep within some forest, is to show them what they do not have. For in doing that, you render their idyllic, happy life, where they have come to terms with nature, all of a sudden extinct. And they want what they cannot possibly have, what they have not the means to obtain. There's no way in the world that they could hope to obtain the education within their lifetime to be able to climb up to the level of that which they have learned we possess, that all of a sudden they covet, that they instinctively understand they cannot have. Unless it's a gift, and sometimes these things are gifts. And yes, there's a lot that we can give them. Medicine. We can give them education, but we have to understand that just because we give them education, we cannot show them all of the greatness of modern society, because there are so many of them that cannot ever hope to have it. It's for their children or their grandchildren. And so we destroy societies and peoples. I learned of this at a young age, and my life didn't change because I spent my entire young life moving from country to country, Air Force Base to Air Force Base with my father. I actually graduated from high school at Yamato Air Station in Japan. The only other time that I spent the entire growing up period of my life was in Midwest City, Oklahoma, where I attended Monroney Junior High School. When it was brand new, built, I was the first, along with many other students, the first young people to attend that junior high school. But I learned early on what it meant to be something other than an American. I learned what it meant. I learned what our responsibility was to these people. Even though no one sat down and taught me those things, I instinctively knew it.